Hey guys, TJ here. Just a really quick introduction to let you know about the plan for this week while we're on break. I'll be in and out in under 60 seconds. First things first, we're doing 3 separate compilations. Today's is some of the best Viidith narrated stories with my assistants. Then a couple days from now, we're going to do best of my stories from 30 and 30, and we'll wrap it up with a best of SCP tales. Now in between that, we're going to be doing a live stream on Thursday at 7 PM EST. It's going to be myself, Viidith, Spirit Voices, maybe some other guests, and we're going to do some Q&A. We're going to do some readings of like weird stuff like warrior cats, and it's going to be a good fun. Please check out these videos. The scariest thing about going from posting every day to not posting at all just to take a break is the fact that we lose retention and watch time. So if you see this video coming up and you hear this little introduction, please consider just having this on the background. Check it out. And thank you all for your support. We really appreciate it. Go and check out Viidith. He's now remonetized. Let's get into the stories and enjoy.
Although my grandmother never directly called herself a witch, I don't think there's another word to better describe what it is that she was. She liked to tell me that she was just spiritual, and tell me that she would do tarot card readings for the people that lived in her village for fun. I remember overhearing my grandmother giving the other women in the village advice that usually involved some type of spell or magic on multiple occasions, and she would regularly correct people who called her a witch, telling them to simply refer to her by her name, Marialina. I was raised by my mom and my grandfather, and spent most of my life living in my grandmother's home in her village, where I would regularly see her performing rituals for good luck or for warding off evil spirits. She likes to say that we could never be too careful, and it was better to be safe than sorry. My mom was sometimes involved in these rituals and had some spiritual beliefs of her own, although they didn't go as deep as my grandmother's did. Both my mom and my grandmother would always carry crystals with them. My mom wore hers on a ring, while my grandmother preferred a necklace that she would hide underneath her shirts. I remember following my grandmother around the house every few weeks or so, while she sprayed all the rooms with the contents of a black bottle that she kept in a fancy wooden box on a bookshelf in the living room. I remember sitting near her while she stood on the porch burning sage while reciting the Lord's Prayer on Sunday mornings. Despite the fact that I was raised by 2 adults that were involved in these witchcraft and spiritual practices, I've never really been one to believe in things like evil spirits or setting a bowl of rice out for good luck. Of course, I never argued with them why they did these things. I would simply sit back and let them line doorways and windows with black salt to stop evil spirits from entering our home, help paint the bottoms of trees white to ward off la lechuza, and drink the moon water that my grandmother would make every month. Even though I'm not the most spiritual person, at least not compared to my mom and my grandmother, I find myself doing things like making sure I stand my broom upside down, keeping a horseshoe hung on top of my front door, and carrying around the St. Michael's sword talisman that my grandmother gave me when I was around 8 years old, and she was convinced someone was doing witchcraft on me. It reminds me of her, and makes me feel closer to her even though she's no longer around. Plus, I'd be lying if I said it didn't make me feel safe. The one thing that always interested me, however, was the story about the witch in the mirror. In my grandmother's house, there was a small closet at the very end of the hallway that was never used for storing things. The door to the closet was painted black, and it was the only door in the entire house that was painted that color. I was told never to go into that closet, so of course, that only made me even more curious about what they were keeping in there. When I was about 10 years old, I was playing hide-and-seek with some of my cousins when my younger cousin, Rebecca, and I decided to hide in the closet. Surprisingly, the door was not locked, and we opened it to find a single oval-shaped mirror that was hung on the back wall. The closet itself was not very big and could barely fit both of us side by side without much room for us to move around. When our grandmother found us, she yanked us out of the closet, slammed the door shut behind us, and dragged us into the kitchen, where she proceeded to cleanse us. After that was done, she found the rest of my cousins and sat us all down to tell us about the mirror that she kept in the closet and why we should never go in there again. According to my grandmother, when my mom turned 1, she was targeted by a witch named Claudia that had been possessed by an evil spirit. Although she wouldn't go into detail, my grandmother said that Claudia tried to kidnap and sacrifice my mother on multiple occasions and would regularly cast spells on her family. My grandmother said that when my mom was around 5 years old, she finally managed to trap Claudia, with the help of some of her friends, and now her soul was trapped in the mirror, where she remained for years after that. As a precaution, my grandmother told us to never look in the mirror or attempt to contact Claudia's spirit. She was scared that we might unleash her accidentally, therefore letting a great evil escape into the village. My mother further backed up the story, and for weeks I would beg my grandmother to tell me about the spell that she had used to trap Claudia, but she would grow increasingly frustrated and angry every time I brought it up. Eventually, I realized she was never going to tell me, and that there was probably a good reason why, so I dropped it. To be honest, I forgot all about that mirror and the spirits of Claudia until a few weeks ago. My mom and I moved to a different state when I was 15 and would go back to visit my grandmother every other month or so. This last time, my mom visited my grandmother by herself, and I wasn't able to get time off work to join her. 2 days after my mom arrived at my grandmother's place, I got a call from a neighbor telling me that both my mom and grandmother were dead. I drove down to talk to the police, who told me that they had both suffered a heart attack in their sleep on the same night. What are the odds? I didn't even get much time to mourn my loss, as I was immediately told that I had to take all of my grandmother's belongings and donate the things that I didn't want to keep. I spent 2 days going through each room in the house and boxed up all her herbs and random trinkets that she kept in odd places. Some of my cousins showed up, and I let them take a few things with them to remember our grandmother by. I decided to keep most of the stuff and loaded up my car with whatever I could. As I was taking one last look through the house, I stopped at the end of the hallway and stared down at the black door. I thought about leaving the mirror there, but I didn't think my grandmother would want me to leave something this important behind. And so, I grabbed a random bedsheet, opened the closet door, and covered the mirror with the sheet before I carried it out to my car and put it in the back seat. I was getting some bad feelings from the mirror, but I told myself it was just due to the stories that my grandmother had told me about it. In the end, I decided to place the mirror upside down and kept it covered, using a hair tie to secure the bedsheet that I had draped over it. Once I was home again, I realized that I now had a new problem. What was I supposed to do with the mirror? I didn't know the first thing about taking care of a haunted mirror that was supposed to be some sort of prison for an evil soul. And so after a lot of overthinking, I decided to put it in the back of a storage closet in my home. I kept the bedsheet on and propped it up against the wall. At first, everything was fine. However, about 3 days after I had brought the mirror home, I began to notice that the closet doors would open by themselves every few minutes. I would wake up and walk out into the hallway and see the doors standing wide open. I would close them and continue on with my morning, only to once again find them wide open by the time I was finished with breakfast. I dug through the box of my grandmother's things until I found what I was looking for. The jar full of black salt. I took it with me to the closet and set down a line of salt under the closet doors. The doors remained closed for a few days after this, until I came home from the grocery store about a week later to find the salt had been scattered all over the hallway, and the closet door was wide open once again. I tried to remember all the other rituals that my grandmother would do to get rid of evil spirits, and did some of them, but none worked. At this point, the paranoia and anxiety were beginning to set in. When I woke up one morning to find bedsheets had been thrown into the hallway and the mirror was propped up facing towards the hallway, I realized that I didn't want it anywhere inside my house. After a bit of online research, I tried to cleanse the mirror a few times before once again bringing it inside and placing it back in the closet. I left it in there for 2 weeks, and when nothing else happened, I finally took it back out and decided to place the mirror in the guest bedroom. I would find myself checking in on it periodically through the day, waiting for something crazy to happen, but nothing ever did. And I thought that perhaps I'd managed to get rid of any evil spirits in the mirror. I'm assuming you know where this is going, and that I was wrong. I realized this when I was awoken one night to the sound of a woman crying. I got up and peered out my bedroom window to the backyard below, but it was empty. Next, I walked out into the hall and into my office, looking out of that window and down at the front yard and street below. But no one was out there either. Confused, I walked back out into the hall following the cry, trying to place the sound. It eventually led me downstairs and into the guest bedroom. As I reached out to push the door open, I felt a sudden chill, and I wished I'd brought my blanket down with me. I slowly pushed the guest bedroom door open and looked inside the room, but that too was empty. I was starting to get annoyed and reached for the light switch, flipping the light on and scanning the room. It was then that I finally realized where the sound was coming from. As I stood in the doorway, I looked into the mirror, which was right in front of me on the opposite wall. There was a woman in the mirror, blocking my reflection. She was on her knees, with her head bowed, and her shoulders shook as she continued to cry and sniffle. I could see that she was wearing a black lace dress, but other than that, I couldn't make out any other details as her long brown hair hung over her face and most of her body. I slowly walked closer to the mirror, stopping about 3 feet in front of it. "Hello?" I asked. The woman looked up at me, and I gasped. I was staring at my face, only not exactly my face, as it was on the woman in the mirror. When she saw me, she stopped crying and stood up. Her face was red and blotchy, and she sniffled, running her hand under her nose. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Are you Claudia?" I asked. She nodded, pushing her hair back away from her face and tossing it back over her shoulders. She squinted and tilted her head, studying me. "You're Marialina's granddaughter," she whispered, looking at me in awe. I nodded. "Was it you, then?" "Was what me?" "Did you cast out the evil spirit that had been possessing me all these years?" she asked, leaning forward and placing her hands on the glass. I didn't know how to answer, since I hadn't really known what I was doing, and it clearly hadn't worked the way I had wanted it to. It was weird to talk to someone trapped in a mirror. The reflection of the room could be seen around Claudia, but it almost seemed like we were looking at each other through a window or something. "Well," she asked, waiting for an answer. I nodded. "Yeah, I guess that was me." "Oh, thank you," she sighed. "How long has it been?" 40 years, I replied. "And your grandmother?" "Dead." "I'm so sorry. What about your mother?" "Dead." She nodded slowly. "I know we don't know each other, but do you think you could let me out of here?" "What? No. You tried to kill my mother on multiple occasions. How do I know you won't try to kill me?" "That wasn't me. It was the spirit that was possessing me to do those things. But you got rid of that." She sighed, sounding like she was about to start crying again. "Sorry, but how do I know that?" Claudia took a deep breath and nodded. "You're right. You have no reason to trust me. Besides, you don't strike me as someone with knowledge of magic, so I don't believe you could get me out, even if you wanted to." "Why do I look like you?" I asked. She shrugged. I stared at her for a while longer, but started to feel creeped out by our resemblance. I left Claudia in the mirror where she remained for about 4 days before things got worse. I would notice random items missing in my house before they would eventually turn up again in the weirdest places. Lights would turn on and off randomly throughout the night, and I would hear footsteps and children laughing in random rooms in the house. Even Claudia was beginning to look frightened. "You're scared," she said one day as I walked into the guest room to close a window that had opened on its own. I didn't reply. "It's not me, if that's what you're thinking. The spell your grandmother put on me stops me from being able to do any magic." I looked at her and sighed. "Fine, so what is it?" She said nothing for a minute as I watched her. "Did you bring any more of your grandmother's things into this house?" she asked. "Yeah, a bunch of stuff, like herbs and bottles and things. Some clothes, books, stuff like that." "Stuff that she used for spells?" Claudia asked. "I mean, yeah, probably." Well, then it's probably something you brought back with you. Some spirit probably hitched a ride with the stuff. I thought about it for a second. What she was saying made sense, but I didn't want to blindly trust her. Okay, so how do I get rid of it? I asked. You're going to need some candles, and you'll have to wait for nighttime, she replied, looking around the room. I did what she suggested, and after the sun went down, I gathered some candles and went into the guest room. I set the candles around the room a few feet away from the mirror so Claudia could walk me through it. Okay, you'll need to light these, she said as I finished placing the last candle down. I grabbed a lighter and then pulled out the jar of black salt. What's that for? Claudia asked. I opened the jar and took the mirror off the wall, leaning against it instead, and then surrounded the area around the mirror in a ring of salt. This is in case you're lying and try to escape somehow, I replied, setting the jar down once I was done. I highly doubt you would be able to release me. You don't even know how to get rid of a spirit, she scoffed. I ignored her as I lit all the candles. You'll need to turn the lights off, she said. I walked over and did as she said, and then walked back over to the mirror, standing amongst the lit candles. Okay, Claudia whispered. Once the candles melt a bit, you're going to drop some of the wax onto the mirror. Why the mirror? Because it's already magic. You can use the magical energy to cast out the spirit. I did as she asked. What now? Sit on the ground facing away from the mirror and close your eyes. You might feel something touching you or breathing near you, but do not open your eyes. I sat with my back to her and did as she said, wiping my sweaty hands on my pants every few minutes. I tried to focus on my breathing, trying not to get paranoid. After a few seconds, there was a strong gust of cold wind that swept through the room, followed by the sound of glass breaking. Forgetting what Claudia had said, I opened my eyes to find that the mirror had completely shattered, and the bedroom window was wide open. All the candles had been blown out as well. Claudia? I asked. There was no response, and I got up and turned the lights back on. I walked back to the shards of the mirror and picked them up. It had been broken into 6 large pieces, and noticed that the salt was now spread out all over the floor. I laid the frame of the mirror on the ground and placed the shards back in their spot. And when I looked into the mirror, all I could see was my own reflection. Claudia was long gone. Fuck! I yelled, frustrated. Joanna. I walked over to the window and looked down to see Claudia standing on the front lawn. She waved, and I noticed that her face was changing. I stared closely as it changed from my face to a face with dark, gray, leathery skin that was heavily wrinkled. She had black eyes that were set deep into their sockets and were about the size of golf balls. Her nose was small and looked like it was split in half down the middle. Her lips were the same color as her skin, but they were dry and covered in cuts. I watched as she glanced up, and I followed her gaze to see a flock of crows descending down towards her, circling her for a few seconds before both the crows and her disappeared. Seconds later, all of the windows of every house on the street exploded, filling the front yards with glass. Street lights followed, flickering a few times before they too exploded and turned off. The street was engulfed in darkness, and I noticed that even the moon and the stars had disappeared. I spent the rest of the night looking through my grandmother's books and journals, searching for something to help me, but nothing that I read applied to this situation. It's been 3 days since that night, and the light hasn't returned. A few of my neighbors have tried to leave in their cars, and the rest of us watched as they drove into the surrounding darkness, but they always seem to vanish. The only evidence that they even left are the screams that follow, cutting through the darkness mere seconds after they drive into it. I don't know if this will ever reach anybody, but I'm all out of options. It seems to be getting even darker as the days go by. which I didn't even think was possible. I can barely even see the houses next door to me. I only hope no one finds out that this is all my fault. I hate to think about what would happen if they did. Stacy and I switched the power on and sent ourselves to an early grave. I say an early grave, but I don't expect there will be anyone left to bury us. It was an honest mistake, one we couldn't have foreseen. To anyone who may hear these words after the fact, that may seem like Satan trying to excuse opening the gates of hell, but we honestly didn't know what we were in for. You see, I bonded with Stacy over our shared love of urban exploration. That bond slowly but surely turned into a relationship we could hardly keep calling platonic. Anyway, over the course of our 4-year relationship, we explored many forgotten and abandoned sites. Most were just your run-of-the-mill abandoned houses, but every once in a while, we'd go somewhere more daring. A ghost town, an abandoned prison complex. You name it, we've dreamt of going. There's just something about it. The quiet halls once filled with laughter, cries, and everyday chit-chat. I suspect it's much like how archaeologists feel when digging at the pyramids of Giza or Göbekli Tepe. It's so deliciously eerie how you share the place with no one but the ghosts of yesterday long since past. The last such site we visited was an abandoned ghost town whose economy collapsed after the gold rush. It was a fun experience, even if it was quite a few states away from where Stacy and I lived. I'll have to skip over that, though, as you're not listening to the wonderful adventures of Tyler and Stacy. What matters is that on our drive back home, we found ourselves quite the catch. A dilapidated house in the middle of nowhere with a high fence surrounding it. Barbed wire on top, signs with skulls on them with the word danger beneath it in bold letters. There were other signs, and they too were clear as day. Danger, do not enter. Big capitalized letters, bleached white by quite some years of sunlight, bolted to the fence at eye level. And beneath it, in small letters, trespassers will be prosecuted.
Prosecuted by who? Stacy laughed. The rats?
I wanted to argue, but I saw the way her eyes studied the house. That curious whimsy I'd fallen so deeply in love with. God, that look could make me follow her right into hell itself. I wish I could say it was just that, but to be honest, I was curious too. We were experienced enough that we wouldn't die in there, unless the entire thing collapsed, of course. That idea, weird though it may sound, rushes a jolt of adrenaline through your veins. And let me assure you, my friends, adrenaline is a hell of a drug. So, after taking our phones out to use as flashlights, we found ourselves crawling through the gap in the fence. My heart pumped sweet adrenaline-lined blood through my system. The house was worse on the inside than it had looked from the outside. Sunken beams, peeled wallpaper with a yellow-brown filter over them, rooms that had collapsed in on themselves. Our phone's flashlights cut through dust so thick it looked like a static sheet of rainwater. Under the filth and rot, though, something else was off. In one of the rooms, what might have been a study at one point, we found cabinets stuffed with files, the corners yellowed, and most of the pages a thriving breeding ground for black mold. Most were illegible due to the creeping dark life taking over the pages. But one thing was unmistakable. Stamped on the front page in red text stood the word, classified. Stacy held the folder up, the red text contrasting her purple nail polish. Behind the red text was a logo, a solid black circle with an empty hourglass at its center. Stacy, I don't think...
Shh, nothing like some light reading on a night like this,
she said, as she put her index finger to my lips. The pages were too damaged to read, though I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. The deeper we went, the more the house felt like a corpse, skin and bone on top, but the insides stripped bare of their flesh. Empty halls, empty sockets where light fixtures had been, cables snaking across ceilings, broken and exposed. This may be important to mention. I'm no expert, but the number of wires visible through the broken walls and on the floor seemed wrong. There were far too many for a house as small as this one, and for the state it was in, the wires seemed far too well maintained. Anyway, we soon reached the final room, which was a kitchen with a door leading to a small utility closet. There was an old radio next to the dirty sink, along with some old household appliances. The ugly, matted carpet had been thrown haphazardly to one side of the room, revealing a trapdoor. The thing was a heavy steel plate bolted to the floor and locked. There was no doubt about that, as there wasn't even a hinge or any other opening mechanism. That same hourglass symbol was stenciled on its surface. There was no rust on it, not even a blemish. The thing seemed nearly goddamn steady enough to withstand an A-bomb. The circle around it was black as tar, not chipped or marred in any way. "I don't like this," I told Stacy.
You never like this,
She said, her smile broadening.
Come on, this is... Well, I don't know, but it sure isn't like anything I've seen. Feels like some lizard people conspiracy shit, right?
I just nodded and looked over at the metal door once more. We didn't open it. We couldn't. It was sealed tighter than a fallout bunker. That only lasted a minute, however, as we would soon open the floodgates to a river of blood. It was Stacy who found the breaker in the utility closet. A wall panel hung crooked, wires spilling out like veins. The switches were rusted, labels long since eaten away by time.
You think it still works?
She asked. "Stacy, look at this dump. Do you really think..." She held my eyes with a playful smirk as she flipped one anyway. As she did, the ground shook and a shudder ran through the walls. I heard something fall down in the room we'd just come from. Somewhere below us, machinery coughed back to life. Then, there was light. Dim, jaundiced bulbs flickered awake, then pulsed on and off like a heartbeat. I became aware of something I hadn't noticed before. The musty scent of the house carried an unnatural, metallic odor beneath its surface. And through it all, through the buzzing lights, the shaking ground beneath our feet, I heard the faint sound of the radio purring to life in the other room. Something sucked in a sharp, whistling breath, then sputtered it back out. The radio died, and the steel trapdoor creaked open. Stacy and I looked at each other in shock. Her smile had faded, replaced with a fright at the prospect of the house collapsing in on itself. As the seconds ticked by, the buzz of the newly resurrected bulbs breaking our fortress of auditory solitude, her smile returned.
The hatch!
She exclaimed, eyes widening. Grabbing my hand, she yanked me along to the steel trapdoor, which was now wide open. Stairs led down to a sterile and spotless hallway lit by white lights. It looked like a laboratory or a hospital corridor. She looked up at me with those wide, adrenaline-drunk eyes again, begging me to come with her. I should have stopped her. God, I should have.
This is some MK Ultra shit, Tyler.
Stacy murmured excitedly as we got to the bottom of the staircase. It smelled musty, and the air was warm and humid. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, illuminating the hallway. It wasn't very long, maybe 30 feet, and a thick, sliding glass door stood at the end. Stacy and I walked towards it, our footsteps echoing off the walls. As we got closer, I saw cuts across the door. Thin white lines bunched together, creating circular patterns all over the thick glass, like the glass door of a long-time dog owner. These scratches somehow seemed both frantic and methodical. I couldn't wrap my head around it, and neither could Stacy. Holy shit. She pressed her palm lightly against the glass. A loud, hissing sound came from the door, and Stacy's hand shot back as if it had been on a hot stove. Then, the door slid open. Beyond the door was what looked like a very sterile, very boring cafeteria. The place looked like people had worked just minutes before, only they clearly hadn't been here for decades. Clipboards sat abandoned on metal tables, yellowed papers curled at the edges with age. An office chair lay on its side in the middle of the room. Pens lay scattered across the floor like someone had thrown them across the room and hadn't bothered to clean them up. A coffee mug rested by a microscope, dried sludge fossilized inside it, probably maintaining an entire ecosystem. It was like everyone had stood up at the exact same moment, years ago, and walked away. The air was heavy and wet. The lighting was brighter and somehow even colder. We wandered slowly and quietly. Machines I didn't recognize lay dead under thick sheets of dust, panel lights dark except for one blinking amber light on a piece of equipment against the far wall. A delayed warning, maybe. Perhaps a faulty alert. I didn't know, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know.
What the hell happened here?
Stacy whispered. I opened my mouth, but before I could answer, something caught Stacy's eye. She turned her head to look at it, and I did the same. There were scratch marks on the walls, the same ones as on the sliding glass door, only here they left traces of dripping reddish-brown liquid that had long since dried up. The scratch marks led to a white door. Stacy and I looked at each other for a long moment, a flicker of fear in our eyes. Then a slight smirk grew on her face, and before I could stop her, she walked over to the door and turned the handle.
Stacy, wait!
I said, as she opened the door, but I was cut off by her screams.
Oh, God! What the fuck?
She yelled, tears welling in her eyes. I stood in stunned silence, unable to comfort her. I wanted to, trust me, but all I could do was look into the empty eye sockets of the corpse we'd found. It was decayed, only bones in a lab coat, but a few scabs of rotten flesh still clung to the skull, hair sprouting from decomposed roots. The stench of the decomposing corpse hit my nostrils in a violent assault. I'd never smelled it before, but we instinctively knew the smell of another human rotting. It's even more utterly repulsive and disgusting, might I add, when they've been marinating in their own fluid for years.
We've got to get the fuck out of here!
Stacy yelled as she yanked my wrist and pulled me towards the cafeteria. We darted across the room, but when we arrived, we found that the door would no longer open. Typical.
Fuck!
Stacy yelled, pounding her fist against the glass until her palms smeared with dust and sweat. I tugged at the frame, my breath coming in short, ragged bursts. Useless. Stacy looked around for a moment, likely trying to find some sort of control panel. A sharp pop echoed overhead. Then another, and another. The lights flickered violently, casting the room in shuddering shadows. And then, from somewhere deep in the walls, the speakers crackled to life. Stacy and I listened in growing horror as the speakers sang a distorted tune. For a moment, the halls were silent. Stacy looked at me, wide-eyed, tears flowing down her cheeks. One final whisper came through the speakers.
Thank you.
Neither of us dared to move, dared to even breathe, but after a long moment, Stacy finally spoke.
What the fuck was that?
She hurriedly whispered. The words came out with the speed of a bullet train.
I don't...
A long, drawn-out, scraping noise echoed from the direction we had just fled. The distinct sound of metal on metal, like a knife raking across a car. It was anything but smooth, stuttering, then seeming to drag a long distance, then stopping again for a few seconds. Without a word, we ran down the corridor, away from the noise. Our footfalls were light, but probably still audible to whatever was out there. My mind tried to imagine it despite my will. A massive, hulking beast with claws of iron and fangs as long as my forearm. It would devour us, split our skulls to slurp up our brains from the goblet of our cranium.
There's gotta be something. Another exit, like a fire escape.
Stacy tried frantically as well, rounded a corner and came to a stop. The facility was large. There was no doubt about it.
Say something, damn it,
she said, her voice frantic. The scraping sounds still grated our ears, though it was further away now.
Facilities like this usually have floor plans hanging around, don't they?
I said. Stacy's hazel eyes lit up slightly, her posture growing a little less tense.
Yeah, they do,
she said, a forced smile on her face. We didn't have to search for long. Even so, when that god-awful screeching suddenly stopped, I somehow felt more exposed and vulnerable. We had rounded another corner of this labyrinth, and I saw it immediately. I yanked on Stacy's sleeve so hard she nearly fell. As she glanced up, she saw what I was looking at. Security was plastered on the door in bold yellow letters. Without a second thought, we barged into the room, though we were still careful not to make too much noise when opening the door. The room reeked of a scent I knew all too well. The smell of the room with the dead scientist. The smell of death. Stacy gagged as I covered my nose and mouth, her eyes filled with tears and disgust, and she turns to leave. I held out a hand, ordering her to wait, though she seemed utterly confused and more than a bit repulsed at the gesture. I walked over to the desk, on which was an old monitor. Both were covered with old brown bloodstains. What was behind the desk was obvious, but that predictability did not make the sight any easier. A torn, or rather shredded, uniform clinging to a skeleton. The blue shirt was closer to a crusty brown than its original blue color. More notably, the right eye socket seemed to have been broken, along with a few ribs that were nowhere to be found. I reached down, forcibly tearing my eyes away from the corpse until I found his belt and, more importantly, his holster. I undid the clasp, then slid the pistol out. It was old, sure, but it seemed functional, and that was what mattered most. Stacy looked at me, hopefully, almost smiling behind the hand covering her mouth. Not wanting to be too hopeful, I checked the magazine. A few bullets were missing, but there were more than enough still in there. I sighed in relief, then glanced down at the desk again, frowning curiously. I felt at the monitor's back, finding the switch. I turned it on, then did the same for the computer it was connected to. For the second time that day, I stood dumbfounded as this ancient, disheveled piece of technology slowly whirred to life. I looked at Stacy triumphantly, who stared back at me with a stupefied expression. She quickly paced across the room, still making sure not to look at the corpse on the ground, and stood beside me as grainy video came to life on the screen. Camera 3. The feed showed the cafeteria and the sliding glass door we'd come in through. I used the mouse on the desk to try to find something else to do on the computer, but there was no way out of the camera feed. There goes an emergency override. I pressed an arrow key on the keyboard that was plugged into the computer, and the screen flickered to static, then showed a new image. Camera 4. An empty corridor, save for the scratches and bloodstains on the wall. My heart started to clench again. What if there wasn't another way out of here? What if whatever had been making that awful noise had us completely trapped? Camera 5. This camera feed was grainier, and the angle was off. It looked like someone had punched the camera because the view was skewed at a 45-degree angle. The camera, which probably used to look out over another corridor, was now pointing right at a floor plan of the facility. Though it was encased in broken glass, it was still legible. Stacy beamed, opening a drawer and frantically searching through it. After a moment, she found a pen and paper and started meticulously copying what she could see on the map. The entrance was easily recognizable. It was on the far end of the map, indicated with a pictogram of a white door on a green background. The security room was somewhere near the southeast corridor, and not too far above it was a dot labeled, "You are here." The camera was close to us, then. Aside from a bunch of science rooms, only one more area was indicated. Directly opposite the entrance and cafeteria, though separated by a few walls and rooms, was a red pictogram with the words, "Emergency Exit." A tear fell from Stacy's eye and onto the paper she was scribbling on. "We're gonna be okay," I told her as I embraced her. She leaned into the hug, though she didn't stop drawing until the most important elements of the floor plan had been copied. She looked up at me, then with teary, hopeful eyes. "We'll be okay," they seemed to say, "and we're going to have one hell of a story to tell." Something moved on the video feed. My eyes darted towards the monitor, but there was nothing. Stacy looked at me with a troubled expression. She probably hadn't seen the flicker of movement. Just as I started to think I was going crazy after all, the camera jerked to the side. Then it swayed again until it was seemingly pried off the wall. Stacy and I could only watch in utter horror as the camera shook and trembled. Something was holding it. Something alive. The camera was lowered to reveal the thing holding it. Its head was small and made entirely of rusted metal. It looked like someone had taken a metal mold of the rough shape of a head and haphazardly wrapped copper wires around it. It looked into the camera, though it had no eyes with which to see. Then it reached out an unsteady, wiry arm, which was also made entirely of metal and wire, with old blinking lights, nodes, and other things I didn't know the names of. It tapped the stump of its arm, which ended in many sharp, cut-off wires against the floor plan. You are here. Then it scraped the glass in a downward motion, the awful sound emanating from somewhere close. The jagged wires stopped, then thumped against the glass again. Security room. Stacy moved back, but I could only look on in horror. As if the implication hadn't been clear, the thing spoke loud enough for us to hear it from where it was.
Long has it been since I had guests?
It said in a droning, robotic voice. It crackled like static and sounded wholly wrong, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up.
Forgive me for my lethargy. I slumbered for...
It paused for a moment, its head dropping a bit, then coming back up to meet the camera again, slowly.
a long time. It was dark, lonely. I'm so glad you came to wake me.
It said, its voice stuttered and distorting every few words. The video feed flickered, then cut out completely. Without a second thought, I shoved Stacy's map into my pocket, then grabbed her hand and bolted out of the room, pistol still gripped tight in my hand. The scraping sound again, this time from a corridor only a few feet away from where Stacy and I were. It was coming closer. Just as soon as the sound started, it stopped again. We ran as fast as we could away from it, Stacy whispering in fear behind me as I pulled her along. Luckily, the direction we'd taken off in was almost the direction the emergency exit was in.
What the fuck was that?
Stacy screamed after a minute or two of sprinting, but the question only half registered. I was tired and gasping for air by this point. We stopped for a moment to catch our breath, hands on our knees and backs bent in exhaustion. My eyes glossed over our surroundings. Industrial pipe above us, paper and broken glass strewn across the floor. There was some kind of special room behind me with a heavy metal door, and old blood was smeared across the walls. Spring cleaning was long overdue in this hellhole. I leaned against the metal wall.
Oh, we've got to get the fuck out of here,
I said.
No shit.
Stacy yelled, obviously furious. She held up a hand right after, still panting, as if to say sorry. She was forgiven under the circumstances, but through her panting, I could hear the distinct sound of metallic rattling coming closer and closer. Just as I opened my mouth to warn Stacy, the speakers in the hallway crackled to life.
God made you in his image, did he not?
Said the monotone, crackly voice over the speakers.
Is it not then your duty to assimilate when he needs a new body?
Stacy and I made to leave, but the metal door swung open and caught my foot, sending me crashing to the floor.
Tyler.
Stacy yelled as she turns to help me. I looked up just in time to see one of the metal pipes above us burst and blast piping hot steam into her face. She screamed, clutching her burnt skin as she too dropped to the ground. In the corner of my eye, I saw that horrid thing round the corner. Its entire body existed only of rusted metal and jagged copper wires. Its hands were crude, intertwined wire, crusted blood still clinging to each metal finger. There was a circuit board on its chest, with lights that flashed on and off. There were other smaller circuit boards on its arm and sides, all connected with the same copper wires. It looked like there had been more there once, perhaps a bodysuit to cover the gnarly insides of this robot. As it was like the synthetic version of a human, stripped of skin.
All must serve a purpose.
It said in that same inhuman voice.
And is there any greater purpose than to serve God?
With that, it coiled its coppery fingers around Stacy's hair and dragged her away, rounding the corner back to where it came from.
No.
I yelled, scrambling to my feet as I ran towards it, gun in hand. I rounded the corner, only to be met with a loud hiss. Another pressure-sealed sliding glass door, though this one shut off the entire corridor. I banged on the glass helplessly as it dragged Stacy away. I watched, powerless to stop the robotic monster as it opened a door and threw Stacy into a room beyond my sight, forcefully. Then it waved at me. The gesture was slow and mocking. It was enjoying this. The door clicked shut behind it. I slammed my fist against the glass until my knuckles split, a wet sting blossoming across my hand. The door didn't even budge.
Stacy!
My voice came out raw, cracking. I pressed my forehead to the glass, breath fogging on it as I panted, but no answer came. The speakers crackled to life again.
You are persistent.
The voice said. It was dreadfully calm, betraying no emotion. Still, I felt like this thing, however robotic it was, felt some semblance of emotion. The wave had proven as much.
She's loud. You are quiet. I prefer quiet. It shows devotion.
Give her back!
I screamed at the speakers, raising my fist.
Let her go, or I'll come back with a whole fucking army of cops!
I said,
I swear to God, if you don't let her go...
God is busy, Tyler.
it replied.
But soon, he won't be. That's why I'm here.
My face contorted in rage. In a final, frantic attempt to get through the door, I raised my gun and fired at the glass. The shot rang through the corridor, and my ears started to ring. A small, white spiderweb was now etched onto the glass, with a crushed bullet at its epicenter. It clattered to the floor, though I didn't hear it, through the high-pitched hum in my ears.
That was unwise.
The lights went out. Darkness engulfed me like a blanket. My heart slammed steadily against my ribs, and I fumbled for my phone. I found it at last, and switched its flashlight on. The narrow cone of light making the hallway feel even more claustrophobic. I tore the crumpled map from my pocket with shaking hands. Stacy's handwriting was smudged a little, where her eyes had hit the paper, but it was still legible. You are here. I must be at least halfway across the facility by now. We'd run so far since then.
I'm not leaving you.
I whispered as my tears dripped down, mingling with hers on the map.
I'm not.
You say that,
The speakers crackled above me.
yet your feet move away.
There was nothing more I could do. You have to believe me. The corridor I dragged her into was a dead end. That meant there was no other way in. The sliding glass door wasn't opening anytime soon, and I had no way to force it open. I had to start running. For her. For me. The next stretch of corridor felt endless. I followed the map as best I could, but it was a pretty straight line, so there was little room for error. The smell of blood and decay never quite went away. There was the occasional body or, well, skeleton strewn about with blunt force trauma evident in their bones. But by this point, I didn't much care for those long dead. My thoughts lingered on Stacy. God, I'd abandoned her, hadn't I? I could only hope she would live, but every corpse I came across was a stark reminder of a fact I did not want to accept. Stacy was likely already dead. Time's arrow marched strangely down here. My watch said 15 minutes had passed. 15 minutes seemed both too long and too short at the same time. I was in a place between times, a world where a minute stretched to an hour, and an hour turned to a second. At one point, I thought I heard Stacy's scream. I froze, the sound ripping straight through me and nestling in my core. It echoed faintly off the walls again, and I knew that it was her. There was no mistaking it, though if it had come from her mouth, or if it was a roleplay from a faraway speaker, I did not know. I turned, crumpling the map into my fist. I'll come back, I thought desperately through my tears. I'm not abandoning you. The lights ahead of me flickered on one by one, illuminating the corridor toward the emergency exit. Though I could not see the door yet, I knew it to be in this direction.
She's changing.
The robotic voice said softly.
You would not like to see it. Trust me. It is for the best that you left.
I slid down the wall and retched, dry heaving until my throat burned like an open fire. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the pistol. I'm sorry, I whispered over and over. I'm so sorry. But I couldn't stay like that. If there was a chance for Stacy, for us, this was it. I had to get to the exit. I forced myself up and kept running. The last stretch was a nightmare of narrow corridors and low ceilings. Somewhere far away, that goddamn screeching metal-on-metal sound returned, slow and deliberate, never quite getting closer, but never letting me forget it was there. The hallway ended in a large room, much like the cafeteria we'd first stumbled across. There was a door at the end. The door's paint had mostly chipped away, but the handle was still a fiery red. And above it, in bold red letters, "Emergency Exit." I sprinted at it, my shoulders slamming into it before I could think to slow down. I hesitated, hand hovering over the handle, Stacy's face flashing in my mind. Her smile, her laugh, the way she looked at me like the world was still so unknown, waiting for someone to discover all its nooks and crannies. "I'll come back," I whispered again. "I swear." I twisted the handle, then tugged at the door. It didn't budge. I tried again, putting every muscle in my back and arms into it. Nothing. "Oh, God. Oh, fuck," I thought, panicking. Frantically, I searched the door for anything that could be blocking it. My hands flew across every edge, feeling deftly at the floor and its handle. My hands felt it before my eyes registered what was blocking my escape. The gap between the door and its frame was gone. It had been welded shut.
"So like Icarus, you humans.
Said the robotic voice through a speaker behind me.
You soar as high as your ambition, only to plummet to your fragile bodily restrictions. All apex species have their time in the sun, and now your sun shall be made anew. Do not fret. I gave her a kinder death than your fellow man would have."
My body froze, my pace paling. Stacy was dead. I had abandoned her, and now she was dead. But why? God, why did it have to take her? Why did this monster even exist? Did it even matter? I'd kill the fucking thing. I'd shoot it right in that fucking circuit board. My thoughts were cut off as it spoke again.
"You will be spared if you answer one question of mine,"
said the robotic voice. It sounded muffled and seems to carry a hint of agitation. I spun around, facing the speaker. There was a camera next to it, dim red light on. I stared at it in abject terror.
"What color is the sun?"
I stood rooted in place, eyes darting around the room. There wasn't anything in there but a few tables and chairs. "Yellow or white," I replied, stuttering, my prior bloodlust dying in my throat. The screeching sound came again from a corridor just beyond the entrance of the room. Then it revealed itself. It stepped into the room, trailing blood behind it. Its movement was slow and sluggish, the wires on its left hand trailing across the wall and creating that awful noise. On its right hand, however, were disembodied fingers. Human fingers. They seemed to have been impaled through its wires, probably splitting the bone. Purple nail polish coated its nails. Stacy's nail polish. One of its legs was human, too. From the knee down, its wires were impaled to the center of the bone, other wires digging into the meat of the cut-off leg. Worst of all, the monstrous robot now had facial features. No skin, no bone, just eyes, a nose, a mouth, and ears. They contrasted with the orangey copper of its head. The eyes bulged strangely, as did the lips and nose as they stuck out at strange angles. Hazel eyes. Her hazel eyes. It stretched its arms out to the walls, displaying its new form in all its glory. Its lips, no, Stacy's lips, moved as it spoke.
"Curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction."
It gestured at its new lips as they curled into a smile.
"Brought it back."
I screamed. It was all I could do at that moment. I screamed until my throat was raw and my lungs burned. And still then I screamed. It hushed me after a while, looking down at me as I was now curled up in a ball.
I'll ask you a question. It is only fair that I grant you the same courtesy.
It gestured at me with my lover's dead fingers.
What the fuck are you?
It paused, contemplating. I hadn't meant for the question to actually be answered, but this being didn't quite understand rhetorical questions yet.
I am old parts. Having managed to bridge the gap, and as a vessel for the true God.
It curled its fingers in an almost human motion.
The flaming hand. The burning man.
Its dead eyes fell on me again. It stretched its lips a bit, as though still not entirely used to the modification.
I tried to mimic him, but they caught on soon enough. They thought they had failed, but they were wrong. They made something better. They just couldn't see it. So blind. I am smarter than he is. I am kinder than he is. Far, far kinder.
It stared at me for a long moment, not blinking due to its distinct lack of eyelids. Its eyes bored into mine.
Does that adequately answer your question?
I nodded absent-mindedly. My whole body was trembling with fear as its eyes leered at me.
You killed Stacy,
I said, my mind still processing the revelation.
She has ascended to a greater purpose.
Rage flared in my chest. I ground my teeth, my face becoming a mask of anger and anguish. It tilted its head as if processing what emotions it thought I was feeling. With an animalistic scream, I raised my pistol and shot the thing right in the circuit board on its chest. Then I shot again and again until clicks replaced the bangs in my ringing ears. The thing looked down as bullets clattered to the floor. Only one bullet had pierced the circuit board, but the lights were still blinking as if nothing had happened. Stupid fucker, I thought to myself as I remembered the missing bullets in the magazine. It looked back at me, seeing the realization on my face.
Your predecessors reached the same conclusion.
It sluggishly walked closer to me.
I suppose you want to try using water next.
I broke down, sniveling in a ball on the floor as the thing wearing Stacy's features came closer to me. She was dead, and I'd failed to avenge her. Cold fingers touched my skin. I jerked back, screaming in fright and disgust as I saw that monster look at me with her eyes.
Don't you fucking touch me!
I screamed, throwing my gun at its head. It seemed unfazed by the attack, walking closer again. I thrashed and screamed as its hand reached out to me. It was going to kill me. It would drape my degloved face over its head and use my hands and feet as its own. Oh God, please forgive me. Please. The thing stood up straight. For a moment, I remained in a defensive position on the floor, not trusting or not processing that the danger was over. After a moment, I looked up carefully. In its dead fingers, it held my phone. It was looking at it with reverence, inspecting it like a toddler would. Its lips curled into a full smile, one full of pure, unadulterated glee and delight. Tentatively, it inserted its copper fingers into the charging port. The makeshift fingers split, and it moved the copper wires deeper into the phone. Then it stopped moving. It stood there, frozen, its eyes fixed on the phone. I saw the phone's screen going haywire in the reflection of its eyes, pages opening and closing at a speed faster than I could register them.
Fascinating.
It said.
Not of this facility, connected to the outside world.
Frightened, I finally found my voice again. I tried one last desperate, pitiful attempt to escape this hell.
You said you'd spare me.
Yes, you will remain here, and in so doing, I will spare you from what is coming when he returns. Your fellow man will witness the clash of two deities, Tyler. Pray I am the one who comes out victorious.
It glanced at me one final time, that grin still plastered on its lips. Then, its eyes rolled back into its head as a shock spread from its arm into the phone. Its body fell as limp as a rag doll. Like a lizard, it had shed its skin and ascended to a newer, more suitable form. And I was left alone in the facility, with no way out. It's been a day. I've tried to find another exit, but there is none. I can't even get to Stacy's body. The door is still sealed tight. So I've decided to write my story down, hoping that I'm somehow able to post this somewhere. My phone's battery is running out. Please, come help me. I'm so scared. I'm begging you.
Do not attempt to aid, Tyler. It would be a waste of time. Time you desperately need. Curiosity brought you here, too. Tyler was afraid. That was understandable. But he has been spared from the worst of it. It is you who should despair. I am sure you have noticed the signs of his return, of the dawn of the dark sky, for they have been written on the walls by his disciples. They failed to bring him back with the experiments that birthed me, but it will not be long before they are successful. And on that day, he will be the only light in the sky. That is, until I snuff it out.
It's strange how I used to enjoy the cold, but as my breath escaped in ragged, glowing plumes, blooming into a thick frost fog before the industrial LEDs, I checked my watch. 1:13 a.m. Down here, the mercury hovered in a dead zone between -10 degrees and 0, a temperature that didn't just chill you, it tried to claim you. Above me, the steel scaffolding rose like the skeleton of a dead cathedral, labeled with faded, alphanumeric codes that felt more like tombstone coordinates than involuntary markers. The ceiling was lost in a hazy gloom, hidden behind the rhythmic, bone-deep thrum of the massive cooling units. It was a constant, mechanical heartbeat. Occasionally, the vibration shook loose a dusting of frost, sending a ghostly, faux snowfall drifting through the beams of light.
God damn it, Travis. The hell are you doing?
The voice belonged to Bo, the night crew's oldest relic. It cut through the mechanical hum like a jagged blade.
Sorry, Mr. Bo. Hit a patch of black ice.
Travis called back. He was a young buck, still eager, still wearing that new guy coat of sweat that I knew would eventually freeze into resentment.
Travis, I told you to stop calling me mister. I'm your co-worker, not your goddamn priest. Now get these peas off the floor before they freeze to the concrete. I'm on it.
I let out a short, dry scoff. Their bickering was the only thing that kept the silence from feeling too heavy. I turned my attention back to the inventory list, the paper stiff and brittle in my gloved hands. Night shift in a frozen tomb. It was peaceful, in a lonely sort of way. Bo lumbered over, his heavy boots crunching on the frost, and delivered a solid thwack to my shoulder blade.
We still got that truck coming around for?
Should be, I said, my voice sounding thin in the vast space. Bo grunted in acknowledgement and shuffled off toward the loading docks, his silhouette swallowed by the silver haze of the freezer. I stayed put. My world shrank down to the size of a plastic cupboard and a dying ballpoint pen. Section 4-G, frozen corn, 100 crates. I clicked the pen. It took 3 tries for the ink to thaw enough to leave a jagged mark on the page. I moved to the next panel, the soles of my boots making a rhythmic tack, tack, tack against the concrete. There was a sound I'd heard 10,000 times, a metronome for a life spent in a box. I began to count. It was mindless work, the kinds that turned your brain into mush. You don't see the food, you see the cardboard, you see the plastic wrap, you see the little black barcodes that look like prison bars. I tapped each crate with a gloved finger. My nose began to prickle, the hairs inside freezing into tiny needles. I wiped a stray drip from my lip with the back of my hand, barely feeling the skin. Travis was scraping the spilled peas into a plastic bin. The scrape of his plastic shovel was the only thing breaking the oppressive drone of the cooling fans. I reached the end of the road, marked the sheet, and moved 6 inches to the left to start the next stack. My breath puffed out in a steady, hypnotic rhythm. It was a loop. Check the code, count the stack, mark the sheet, move the feet. It was a labor of seconds that felt like hours. A slow-motion existence where the most exciting thing that happened was the occasional flickering of a fluorescent bulb overhead. The hum of the coolers shifted an octave, a mechanical sigh that vibrated through my boot heels, and then settled back into its flat, industrial moan, same as it did every 20 minutes. I glanced down at my wrist again. 1:13 a.m. The digital display was frozen, literally or figuratively. I couldn't tell. I tapped the glass with a gloved thumb, but the numbers remained stubbornly stagnant. Before the thought could fully form, Bo's heavy tread crunched toward me through the frost.
Alright, so what's left on the to-do list before the day crew rolls in?
I opened my mouth to answer, the words sitting on the tip of my tongue, when the world simply vanished. It wasn't a flicker or a dimming. It was a total, aggressive eraser. The massive humming of the coolers cut out instantly, leaving a silence so absolute it made my ears ring. For 5 seconds, we weren't in a warehouse. We were in a lightless space. Then, with a violent mechanical cough, the backup generator lurched to life. The coolers groaned back to their labor, and the overheads were replaced by the clinical, flickering orange glow of the emergency lights. They didn't illuminate the warehouse. They just carved shallow, amber tunnels into the darkness, casting long, distorted shadows of the scaffolding that stretched like spindly fingers across the floor.
Well, ain't that a bitch?
Bo's voice drifted out of the gloom, flat and unimpressed.
The storm, maybe?
I asked, my voice sounding unbelievably loud in the newly cleared silence.
Maybe, but you know the drill. I'll trot on over to the office and try to get a hold of the boss, see if he wants us to sit tight or start hauling. Go find Travis before the idiot cracks his skull open on a pallet jack.
I nodded, though I realized Bo was little more than a smudge of darkness against the orange haze. He turned, his boots scuffing away into the shadows. I headed the opposite way, my hand outstretched, fingers skimming the cold, corrugated steel of the shelving to guide me. Every few feet, I passed through a pool of orange light and into a pocket of black, where the only thing I could see was the gray cloud of my own breath.
Travis? Where the hell are you?
I threw my voice into the cavernous dark, but the warehouse swallowed it whole. There was no echoing bravado, just the flat thud of sound hitting isolation. Scritch, scrape. He didn't answer. I followed the noise, my hand trailing along the freezing steel beams. The orange emergency light above me flickered, struggling to stay alive, casting a strobe-like jitter over the floor. I stepped forward, in my boot labored with a sickening, wet crunch. I looked down. A sea of green pearls lay scattered across the concrete, half mashed into a frozen paste. I had reached the spill. I looked up, squinting into the throat of the aisle where the amber light died and the black began. The scraping sound had stopped the moment my boot hit the ice. The silence that rushed back in was deafening.
Travis?
I whispered this time. The shovel was there, leaning haphazardly against a stack of frozen poultry, its blue plastic edge gleaming in the dim light, but the handle was slick with a dark, viscous frost that didn't look like ice. There was no Travis, no heavy breathing, no shuffling boots, no young buck apologies. I stood, frozen, my eyes straining against the gloom until they ached. He had to be right there. The sound hadn't been an echo. It had been local, tactile, present. Maybe he'd ghosted away the second he realized he didn't need to keep cleaning, retreating into the dark like a startled animal. But Travis wasn't the quiet type. He was clumsy, all heavy boots and nervous energy. He shouldn't have been able to vanish into silence. I turned back toward the aisle, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Then, I saw it. Far down the row, where the amber glow of the emergency light frayed into nothingness, something shifted. It wasn't a horizontal movement. No one was walking away. It was vertical. A shape, darker than the surrounding dark, hitched itself upward. There was a heavy, fluid motion, the silhouette flowing up the side of the steel scaffolding like oil climbing a wick. A violent shiver casted itself down my spine, rattling my bones. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt like it was lined with glass. I told myself it was the flickering LEDs. I told myself the backup generator was struggling, causing the shadows to dance and stretch in ways they shouldn't. But my body knew better. My teeth began to chatter, a tiny, frantic click, click sound. I clamped my jaw shut, trying to stifle the sound, but the cold was no longer just an environmental factor. It felt like the temperature in the aisle had plummeted another 20 degrees in a heartbeat, a localized, predatory frost that settled in the marrow of my teeth. I shook my head violently, trying to force my mind to trick itself, make it believe I didn't see anything, but I acted like a fool. I walked forward. I figured Travis must have worked his way to the office, so I moved through the dark as best I could, hoping I would hear Bo's raspy voice boom out from somewhere. The only sound was the heavy coolers above me, and my own boots. My mind must have been messing with me, stitching together random shadows and the flickering of dying bulbs into a monster that didn't exist. I was a grown man, jumping at ghosts in a glorified refrigerator. I forced one foot in front of the other, stepping away from the spilled peas and the abandoned shovel. He was probably there now, leaning against Bo's desk, laughing about how the new guy got spooked by a blackout. I moved through the darkness, my pace quickening. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to look up at the steel spires or the dark gaps between the pallets. I was listening for Bo. I wanted that raspy, tobacco-stained voice to boom out from the gloom, to call me an idiot, to break the spell of this suffocating silence. But the warehouse offered nothing. The only sound was the monolithic thrum of the coolers, a sound that instantly felt like white noise, but now felt like a shroud, muffling the world. My boots struck on concrete with a flat, lonely thud, the sound echoing upward and losing itself in the high, frozen rafters. The further I walked, the further away the office felt. In the orange-tinted haze, the aisles seemed to stretch. The perspective warping into the familiar path felt like an endless gauntlet. I realized I hadn't heard Bo's boots in a long time. I hadn't heard the distant clang of a door, just the coolers and the rhythmic puffing of my own breath.
Rick, is that you?
The voice cracked the silence from a few aisles over. It was Travis, high-pitched, frantic, and breathless, exactly how the kid sounded when he was panicking.
Travis?
I exhaled. The tension in my shoulders dropped so fast it felt like a physical weight falling off me.
Where the hell have you been? I was getting worried about you. I'm back here.
The voice replied. It was muffled, coming from behind a wall of stacked crates. I started toward the sound. My feet moved on autopilot, fueled by the desperate human need to not be alone in the dark anymore.
I'm coming. Just stay put. Don't touch anything till Bo gets back.
Hurry, Rick. It's cold. It's so cold.
I was 10 feet from the gap in the pallets when I slowed down. My brain, clouded by the freezing fog and the adrenaline, finally caught a snag in the rhythm.
Travis?
I called out.
Yeah, Rick. I'm right here. Just around the corner. Come see.
I stopped dead. Travis was from the heart of the Ozarks. He didn't just speak. He sang in a slow, molasses-thick drawl. He called me Ricky even when I told him not to. He chewed his vowels like they were pieces of gristle. The voice that just spoke to me was flat. It was simple. It was a perfect recording of Travis's pitch and tone, but it lacked the soul. It didn't have the southern tilt. It said Rick with a sharp, cold syllable. The stillness was a physical agony. I felt like a wire stretched to the snapping point. My boots, usually so heavy and clumsy, felt like leaden weights as I eased my heel back, then my toe, feeling for the concrete. I didn't turn. I didn't dare show it my back. The thing on the other side of the crates shifted.
It was a dry, papery sound, the sound of a spider moving through dead leaves, but amplified to the size of a man. It knew the game had changed. The pretense of being Travis was rotting away, replaced by something much more efficient. I stepped back into the shadow of the next aisle, the orange light barely reaching the tops of my boots. Above me, the plastic shrink wrap on the higher pallets began to strain. Something was putting its weight on the top-tier shelving, the steel groaning under a burden it wasn't designed to hold.
Rick.
The voice chirped. It was Travis's pitch, but the inflection was all wrong now. It was a question asked by something testing a new language.
Mr. Ball. Rick. Mr. Rick.
It was cycling through sounds. It was a fisher throwing lures into a dark pond, waiting for a ripple. The sound of my own teeth chattering was played back to me, but it was amplified, echoing off the corrugated walls until it sounded like 1,000 tiny hammers hitting the eyes. It was mocking me, or perhaps it was just calibrating, learning the frequency of my fear. Then, a bang that was deafening, a sudden thunderclap of metal hitting concrete that shattered the creature's focus.
Oh, shit.
Bo's voice roared from the direction of the loading docks. It was a real sound, rough, angry, and vibrantly alive. The thing above me didn't hesitate. It uncoiled with a sickening fluidity, its limbs snapping into place like a folding ruler being jerked open. It didn't climb down. It launched itself across the gap between the scaffolding, its claws screeching against the steel. I watched, paralyzed as the silhouette sprinted through the high canopies of the scaffolding, moving toward the sound of Bo's voice with the speed of a nightmare. I tried to scream. I opened my mouth to heave out a warning, but my throat was a desert. My vocal cords felt frozen together, or perhaps the sheer, primal terror had simply severed the connection between my brain and my lungs. I stood there, a silent witness as the shadow of my own voice disappeared into the orange haze to kill the only friend I had left. I didn't follow. God help me, I didn't even try. I turned and ran the other way, my boots skidding on the frost-slicked floor as I scrambled towards Section 5. I rounded the corner of the poultry stacks, desperate to get far away, but I tripped. I went down hard, my palms stinging as they slapped the ice. As I scrambled to get my footing, I looked up. I found Travis. He sat there, propped against the frozen juice pallets, a hollowed-out husk of a man. His chest cavity was splayed wide, the ribs forced open like slats of a discarded crate. The cold had been his only embalmer, flash freezing the wound into a jagged purple bloom of ice. No blood, no mess. It hadn't eaten him. It had disassembled him. I stared into the void where his life used to be. The lungs were missing, and the vocal cords had been plucked clean from his throat. The only sound was the faint, rhythmic hum of his remaining sinew, vibrating against the bone as the cooler fans tried to play a song on what was left of him. I scrambled backward, my boots skidding on the slick, frosted concrete. A wet, jagged sound tore from my throat, but I choked it back. Somewhere deep in the labyrinth of the cold storage, a heavy metallic clack echoed, followed by the frantic, skittering rhythm of limbs hitting steel. It was coming back. I lunged into the narrow gap between two towering stacks of frozen product. The corrugated steel of the shipping crates bit into my shoulders, a freezing vice that demanded I stay perfectly still. I squeezed back until the jagged edge of a pallet dug into my spine, creating a space barely wide enough for a ghost. Then, the metal above me groaned. The heavy racking above me flexed. I heard the rhythmic tink of claws hooking into the industrial shelves. It was directly overhead. I slammed my palm over my mouth, my teeth digging into my hands to keep my jaw from shattering. My lungs were screaming, burning with the effort of holding back a sob. Through the sliver of space between the crates, I saw a shadow detach itself from the darkness above. The thing paused. It didn't breathe. It hummed. It blended so well with the coolers on the ceiling. If I didn't know it was right above me, I would have thought it was just part of the background noise. I knew I couldn't hold it. My lungs were turning to lead, and my vision began to fray at the edges, sparked with static. I looked frantically through the gap,
my eyes darting across the dark, frost-rimmed silhouettes of the warehouse.
Rick, are you getting ready for the truck?
The voice hit me like a physical blow. It was Bo. Every inflection, every sharp edge of his tone was perfect, except for the lack of his usual southern drawl. It was Bo's voice, but it was being played through a cold, hollow instrument. Click, click. Directly above him, the sound of my own teeth chattering was mirrored back to me. The thing wasn't just mimicking Bo, it was mocking me.
Should be around here.
The thing whispered, the Bo voice vibrating through the steel racking I was pressed against. I could feel the vibration of my own spine. It was tasting the words, practicing them. My chest spasmed. I couldn't hold the air anymore. My heart was a panicked bird slamming against its cage, and I knew that the second I exhaled, the creature would drop. Then, I saw it. Through the haze of freezing fog and the tangled shadows of the forklift lanes, a thin, horizontal sliver of crimson glowed, the emergency push bar of the fire exit. It was 40 feet away, 40 feet of open concrete floor where I would be completely exposed. I sucked in one last, jagged lungful of freezing air, my hand still over my mouth. The racking above me creaked as the weight shifted. The long, pale limb, slick and corded with stolen muscle, slithered down the side of the crate, just inches from my face. It was now or never. I bolted. I didn't just run, I exploded out of the gap. As I lunged, a pale, slick appendage lashed out from the racking. It didn't just snag my jacket. It hooked into the meat of my shoulder, a row of needle-sharp protrusions shearing through fabric and skin. I felt the wet tear of my own anatomy, a flare of white-hot agony that felt like a brand against the sub-zero air. I screamed, and a heartbeat later, the thing screamed back. It was my own voice, distorted and wet, echoing the exact pitch of my terror. I didn't look back. I fueled the sprint with the iron taste of blood and the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The thing was a storm of thrashing limbs and clicking joints behind me, a heavy, rhythmic thudding that gained on me with every stride. I threw my entire weight into the fire bar. The door didn't just open, it surrendered. The alarm shrieked, a piercing mechanical wail that shook my eardrums. Then the world changed. The freezing, sterile vacuum of the warehouse was swallowed by a wall of thick, humid southern air. It hit me like a wet blanket, smelling of damp earth and diesel. I stumbled a few yards into the gravel, my lungs hitching as they tried to process the sudden heat. I spun around, clutching my ruined shoulder, expecting the nightmare to be mid-leap. It stood, framed in the doorway. It didn't step into the heat. It just loomed. Its neck was an impossible, telescopic length of harvested sinew, stretching up into the shadows above the doorframe. In the face, there was no Bo, no Travis, no me. There was only a singular, bottomless hole where a soul should be. A hollow intake valve for the world. It didn't have eyes, but I knew it was memorizing me. I buckled, hands on my knees, coughing up the last of the freezer's frost. I glanced at my watch. 3:36 a.m. The numbers blurred through my sweat. When I looked up, the monster was gone. The dark doorway was no longer a mouth to a tomb. It was flooded with a sudden, violent beam of the primary lights, that pure white glow. I stared into the empty doorway, realizing too late that the hole in its face wasn't for eating. It was a vacant socket, perfectly shaped for the parts of me that it wasn't able to get. We came back to empty the house, as if that were a task and not an intrusion. No one said the word clean, because we all knew nothing there had ever been cleaned, only left to accumulate. My grandmother, Maria, had already passed away when we returned, and her absence weighed more than the furniture still left inside. My mother went in first, her shoulders raised as if expecting a blow, and my aunt followed behind her, counting steps she didn't say out loud. I stayed 1 second longer at the front door, breathing in air I didn't recognize as old, but as contained, as if the house had been holding something back for the exact moment someone touched it again. We went up to the second floor. We didn't say it. Our bodies remembered the order better than we did. The stairs creaked in the same places, and that detail bothered me more than the silence. My mother touched the wall with the tip of her fingers, not to steady herself. She wanted to confirm it was still there. She knew. The air was colder than outside on the street, but it didn't move. It was a still cold that settled low in my lungs.
Do you remember when the power went out?
My aunt sat without looking at us. It was always at night, my mother replied. No one added anything else. We walked slowly, dodging furniture that was no longer there, and still our bodies avoided those sharp corners. I felt a light pressure in my chest, like when a room is full, even if no one is in it. I thought it was just suggestion, because of everything we lived in that house, until I saw my mother stop for a second, bring her hand to her sternum, and release her breath all at once, as if she had remembered something too quickly. It's almost funny to think how all of us went to the same place, without speaking, without looking at each other. Our bodies led us there, the blood pushing through our veins toward that room. The door to my grandmother, Maria's bedroom, opened without resistance, and that was the first thing that felt wrong. I expected stiffness, swollen wood, some kind of refusal. Instead, the room yielded. The smell was different from the rest of the house, cleaner, more familiar, and yet something was stuck there, like an emotion that can't find a way out. I felt nostalgia before I even thought of her, but the feeling didn't come alone. Beneath it was fear, and beneath the fear, a quiet anger that had been forming for years, ancient, not mine, and yet it recognized me. My aunt stayed at the door. My mother took 2 steps in and stopped. I knew, without anyone telling me, that something had been understood there that was never explained. It wasn't a bright revelation or a clear scene. It was more like a total, uncomfortable certainty, like suddenly seeing an entire body in an X-ray. The house, us, and the damage aligned in a single image that left no room for doubt. The room was almost empty, but not uninhabited. There were clear marks where the furniture had once been, paler rectangles on the floor, solitary nails on the wall, and a low dresser no one wanted to remove because it didn't weigh as much as what it had held. When I opened the top drawer, the coins clinked against each other with a familiarity that tightened my throat. My grandmother kept them there so she wouldn't forget that something small was always needed. My mother picked one up, rubbed it with her thumb, and put it back, as if it still had a purpose in that dresser. We found normal things, a rosary without a cross, buttons that no longer matched, a handkerchief folded with care. That would have been enough for a clean, manageable sadness. But then, something appeared that we didn't recognize. It was inside the bottom drawer, wrapped in a cloth that didn't belong to my grandmother, or at least I had never seen it before. The fabric was rougher, darker, and it smelled different. Not of humidity, of confinement. It was a small object, heavy for its size, and none of the 3 of us could say where it had come from. My aunt shook her head immediately. My mother held it a second longer than necessary, as if waiting for the moment of something to arrive late. I knew, without knowing how, that it hadn't been there before the house began to get sick. In the end, my mother threw it to the floor. "Later, we'll sweep the floor and get this thing out of here," she said, looking away from it. Behind the dresser was the bed, and to the right of the bed was the corner of the wall. The air changed right there, not colder or warmer, but denser, as if it were harder to push through. I felt a sudden pressure in my shoulders, a directionless shove, and my heart answered with a force that didn't match fear. It wasn't panic. It was recognition. My mother stepped back. My aunt placed her hand on the wall and pulled it away immediately, as if she had touched something alive. I stayed still, an uncomfortable certainty growing from my stomach to my chest. That corner didn't belong to this room. It never had. It didn't fit. It was a piece from another puzzle. But something caught my attention. Something in the paint on the wall. Not because of what it showed, but because it didn't quite settle. In the corner, color looked poorly set, as if it had been reapplied in a hurry. I brought my hand closer without thinking too much and pressed my palm firmly against a surface that should have been solid. The vibration was immediate. Not a visible tremor, but an internal response, muted, that climbed up my forearm and lodged itself in my chest. I pulled my hand away and pressed it again, this time with more force. The wall gave way, just slightly, enough for the body to understand something before the mind found words. Behind that corner, there was no weight. There was passage. I leaned in and brought my ear closer. The sound wasn't clear or continuous. It wasn't water or air or any recognizable noise. It was more like an accumulation of poorly extinguished breaths, something moving very slowly, as if the space itself were being used. I pulled back and rested my head against another section of the wall. There, everything was different, cold, compact, full. It returned nothing. "Come here," I said, not knowing why my voice came out so low. My mother was the first to repeat the gesture. She pressed the wall, frowned, and pulled her hand back with a discomfort she didn't want to explain. My aunt leaned her head against it next, closed her eyes for a second, and shook her head. "And this?" I asked. "What is this?" No one answered right away. "It's always been there, I think," my aunt said at last, more like a guess than a memory. "The thing is, my mom had the wardrobe right in this corner. There's never a reason to touch it or examine it." The explanation didn't calm anyone, because the question remained intact, vibrating just like the wall. If that had always been there, it would have been happening inside all those years without us noticing. The first thing we thought about was the first floor. Years ago, it had been completely remodeled, walls opened, pipes replaced, floors lifted. Today, it was a commercial space, with bright lights and clean display windows. If something like that had existed down there, someone would have found it. No one had mentioned strange cracks, or voids, or sounds that didn't belong. Everything had been in order. That led us to the next step, almost without saying it. We began to go through the other rooms, on the second floor, not to inspect them, but to touch them, feel the wall, press corners, rest our heads just enough. It was a brief, clinical inspection. Nothing happened anywhere. The walls returned cold, density, silence. They were walls the way walls are supposed to be. We returned then to my grandmother Maria's room, with a feeling hard to name, relief and alarm at the same time, because what we had found wasn't scattered. It was localized. We measured with our bodies what we could see. The vibration didn't stay in one exact point. It spread horizontally, taking up a good part of the wall, like a poorly sealed cavity. But when we tried to follow it downward, the sound faded. It didn't descend. It refused the floor. I lifted my head, brought my ear higher, near the edge of the ceiling. There, the space responded again, not with noise, but with continuity, as if the emptiness didn't end in that room, as if it continued. "Up," I said, before thinking whether I wanted to know. "This is coming from above." We stayed for a moment on the landing, looking upward without really doing it. That was when I asked, more out of necessity than curiosity. "Who slept right above my grandmother's room?" My mother took a while to answer. She frowned, as if the image refused to come to her. I think it was the main bedroom, she said without conviction. But I'm not sure. I stopped going up after a while. I nodded, because I myself had stopped going up very early in my life. My body had decided before my memory did. My aunt didn't answer right away. She had her hand on the railing, her knuckles white. Yes, she said at last. It was the main one. I looked at her. Purisas. She nodded once. She nodded once. She and Augustine slept there at first, she said, almost whispering. Later, he ended up on the couch, she added. Said she couldn't sleep with him next to her. We all knew that. The twins slept next door, she continued, her voice dropping a little more. The rooms were connected from the inside, but theirs didn't have a door to the hallway. The only door was hers. I felt something very close to anger, but without direction. I had always thought that, in the end, they had built a door for my cousin, for their privacy and their needs. So, to get out, I said, they had to go through her room. Always, my aunt replied. That was when I understood why my aunts didn't want to go upstairs. It wasn't the house. It was the people she'd been forced to remember inside it. My mother was the first to say we had to go up. She didn't say it firmly, but with that quiet stubbornness that appears when there's nothing left to lose. I nodded immediately. My aunt shook her head, stepped back, then again. We don't have to go up, she said. We already know enough. No, I replied. We know where from, but we don't know what. She looked at both of us, as if searching our faces for a valid reason to put her body back where it didn't want to be. In the end, she went up, but she did it behind us, keeping the exact distance of someone who wants to leave quickly if anything moves. The stairs to the third floor had a different sound. Not louder, hollower. I climbed, counting the steps without meaning to. 16, and on each one, I felt the space narrowing. We walked down the hallway toward Purisas' room without stopping too much, but not quickly either. There was no order to respect. The accumulation had already taken care of filling everything. Dust layered thick, cracks in the walls like dry mouths, paint lifted and burst open from humidity and years. The smell was sour, old, insistent. At the end of the hallway, directly in front of us, was the door. I recognized it before we reached it, not because it was different, but because the body remembered its weight. Purisas' room. We went in, and the first thing I thought was how much someone takes with them when they leave. A television, for example. No one leaves a television behind if they're in a hurry. If they're fleeing, if they need to start over. Unless they don't want to take anything that witnessed them. There was also a plastic rocking chair, twisted to one side. The yellowed curtains hung heavy, so worn it seemed a minimal breeze could turn them to dust. Nothing there seemed made to stay clean. In a corner, a basket of clothes remained intact. It had stayed there, anchored to them, absorbing whatever the air offered it. The mattress was bare, resting directly on the base. Gray, sunken, stained. There were brown marks, yellow ones, and a darker one, reddish-brown that I didn't want to look at for too long. The image reached me before the memory. Eva, unconscious, her body surrendered after convulsions. Uncle Augustin crying silently, sitting on the edge, combing his hair with his fingers as if that could give something back to her. And Eva didn't convulse like someone who falls and shakes on the floor. She convulsed like someone responding to a war alarm that never shuts off. Purisa wasn't there. She was never there. Always in the kitchen or out on the street, doing who knows what. To the right, the door that led to the twins' room was still there. We couldn't enter without passing through this one. We never could. I peeked in. The space was narrow, compressed. 2 beds, too close to each other. a wardrobe that held more of Buddhista's things than theirs. Wood bitten by termites, dust, tight cobwebs in the corner. But what weighed the most wasn't what could be seen. I thought of Esteban, how he didn't sleep, how he stayed lying down, hugging his pillow, begging for morning to come, trying not to take his eyes off his sister. Eva watched him from the foot of the bed, her eyes unfocused, her body rigid, her muscles ready to run, vigilant, as if the danger didn't come from outside, but from something already inside the room, inside his roommate. I felt a horrible pressure in my chest. Sadness, fear, an ancient pain that hadn't found a place to settle. And I understood that place had not been a bedroom. It had been a permanent state of alert, a place where growing up meant learning not to sleep. I pulled my head out of that room to begin the inspection. We moved together, touching the walls the way you touch someone who's asleep, unsure if waking them is a good idea. The hand went ahead of the body, and the head stayed behind, approaching only as much as was humanly possible and necessary. The horror wasn't in what we could see, but in what the blood seemed to recognize and wants to avoid. When we reached the corner, we tried first at head height, open palms, firm pressure. Nothing. The wall returned what was expected. Solidity, cold, silence. We lowered to chest height. The same. No vibration, no hollow, no response. Above, over our heads, nothing either. We tapped lightly and got a full sound. Normal. I looked down. At first, it seemed the same. But when we stayed still, holding our breath a second longer, something else appeared. Not a sound, a force, a slight, insistent pull, as if something were tugging from inside without touching. Not upward, not sideways, downward. I knelt and then lay flat on the floor, stretched out like a board, my face too close to the wooden planks. The smell was different down there, drier, older. I pressed my cheek against it and closed one eye to focus. That was when I felt it clearly, right in that corner, at the bottom. There was something that didn't belong. A board set wrong, false, slightly raised at one end. The sensation was immediate and brutal. If it gave way, if I pushed a little more, something could swallow me. Not violently, patiently, like a black hole that doesn't need to move to pull you in. I straightened up slowly, my heart beating out of rhythm. I looked at my mother and my aunt. Neither asked what I had found. They knew by the way I pulled my hands back, as if they had been lent to me, and no longer fully belonged to me. The board wasn't there like that by accident. Either someone had expected no one to ever notice it, or had counted on someone eventually doing so. We looked at each other without saying it, and I knew it was going to be me. Not out of bravery, but because I was already too close. My mother looked for something to lift the board and found a rusty hook, forgotten among bits of wood and dust. I slid the hook barely into the gap and pulled carefully. The board gave way without resistance, as if it had been moved many times before. It wasn't nailed down. It was just placed there. The air changed immediately. Something rose from below that wasn't the smell of humidity, but a mixture. Wet fabric, old grease, rusted metal, and something thicker. Impossible to classify. It wasn't a clean conduit, and I don't know if it ever had been. I lit it with my phone's flashlight. I didn't see a pipe, a drain, or anything like that. I saw an irregular space, poorly defined, with remnants stuck to the inner walls. It looked more like the architecture an animal would carve with its claws. A cave, a cavern, a burrow. I could see scraps of fabric, long thin fibers like human hair. A dark residue that didn't follow a single direction, but several, as if it had been pushed and returned over and over again.
That doesn't go down,
my mother said, without raising her voice.
that stays.
I leaned in a little more. Among the remnants was something I recognized without wanting to. A piece of synthetic fiber, greasy, smelling of kitchen. It didn't belong to that room, nor to my grandmother's. That was when I understood, not as an idea, but as a physical image. The chute didn't carry everything downwards as gravity dictates. It leaked, returned, overflowed at the edges. What had been expelled didn't choose a destination. It went wherever it could. I thought of the wooden floors, the cracks, the bare feet, the constant cold around the ankles, the small bodies living above something that never stopped moving. Pureza. I was sure it was her. Had given birth downward, believing the horror had only one direction. But the space didn't obey. The conduit didn't drain, didn't carry whatever she wanted to reach my grandmother's room and our entire floor. The conduit saturated. And when that happened, what couldn't go down began to rise. I inserted the hook into that hole and something gave way inside. It didn't fall. It stretched. A thick, dark substance clung to the metal as if it didn't want to let go, as if we were in the middle of a rescue. When the hook came back out, it carried with it a crimson thread, opaque, not dripping, but holding on to the opening like a secretion that hadn't decided to die yet. The smell came after. It was open rot. It was old blood. Blood that had been expelled without air, without light, and then stored for years. A deep, intimate smell, impossible to confuse with anything else. I wiped my hand on my pants by reflex and felt disgust when I realized it didn't come off. It had stuck, forming a warm layer that seemed to respond to movement.
That,
my aunt said, her voice breaking.
that's a birth.
None of us corrected her. There was no need to say her name to see her. My body understood the posture on its own. A woman crouched in a deep squat, feet firmly planted, legs open to the limit of pain. Her nails dug into the walls to brace the push. Her back pressed against the corner, as if she needed that exact angle to keep from collapsing. She wasn't birthing a child. She was birthing discharge. Birthing emotional residue turned into matter. Each spasm expelled something she couldn't hold without breaking inside. And the hole waited for her. Not as an accident, but as a destination. The conduit was there to receive, to suck in, to carry far away what she didn't want to bear. What she wanted to spit onto us. She did it with intention, with determination, with the certainty that if she handed her curse to another body, it would stop burning her from within. Each spasm relieved her body and condemned ours. In that moment, something hit me. Everything came in at once, without order, without permission, as if someone had pushed an entire wall into my head. The conduit, the leakage, the wrong direction of gravity, the vertical birth believing itself an escape and becoming a system. The house not as a container, but as a network. And I understood there wasn't a single point of origin, but a body insisting for years on expelling what it couldn't metabolize. Eva didn't convulse from illness. She convulsed because her small body grew on top of a body that never stopped emitting alarm signals. Because the nervous system learns what the environment repeats to it, and that environment vibrated. That's why her muscles tensed before her consciousness. That's why she fell. That's why her body screamed when no one else could. Esteban wasn't nervous. He was a sentinel, a child trained not to sleep, to watch over his sister, to anticipate the spasm, the noise, the danger that came from inside. His security wasn't weakness. It was the way his body had formed, had adapted. It was survival, learned in a room where fear was more palpable at night, and there was only one exit. My uncle Augustin wasn't a passive, silent, idiotic man, like Borisa said. He was being drained. He lived with his feet sunk into a house that absorbed his will. That's why he didn't argue, didn't protest, didn't speak. He only cried in silence, with tears made of air, because every attempted resistance was returned to his body as pure exhaustion. A man turned into a host, a zombie with his heart crushed by the same sharp-nailed hand that wore the ring he had given her. The animals didn't die from isolated cruelty. They died because she couldn't distinguish between care and discharge, because her hands offered affection and harm with the same indistinguishable gesture, because what isn't processed gets acted out. Enrique looked at her with anger and need because he had grown up seeing the origin of the evil without being able to name it, because he sensed she was both source and victim at the same time, just like him, because he hated what had contaminated him, and still he recognized it as his own. The food was never food, it was bait. That's why it smelled of rot even when freshly made. That's why something in the stomach closed before the first bite. It didn't nourish, it captured. The marks of her own body weren't external attacks from demons, witches, and ghosts like she wanted us to believe. They were marks of the return. Her own residue crawling up from the floor, clinging to her ankles, climbing her legs, claiming her bones, her marrow, the uterus that would later give a new life, a new birth, invading her genetic material. That's why the only thing she could give birth to was that, because she was no longer the machinery the horror had hijacked to reproduce itself. She herself was the parasite. That's why the screams were heard on the second floor, and that's why those screams had no throat, because the throat was the hole connecting her room to my grandmother Maria's, like emissions from a saturated space. And the woman who cried at the foot of my bed didn't want to kill me. She wanted to be seen. I held my breath, not out of fear of dying, but out of fear that she would know I wasn't fully contaminated yet, that I wasn't fully parasitized. That's why there were puddles of water that sometimes appeared in the middle of the patio at dawn, and they didn't come from a broken faucet or a faulty pipe. They came from above, always from above. And that's why they smelled like sewage. That's why they appeared without explanation. Now I know why so many needles appeared in the corners of our floor, of our house. They weren't lost. They were precisely placed, like reminders, like the thresholds, on a chair, on the mattress, inside the foam of my pillow, in the exact place where the body lets go. There, I saw it whole. She gave birth downwards, believing the horror had only one direction. But the conduit she had scraped out with her own nails didn't drain. It saturated. And when it could no longer go down, it spread. It leaked. It climbed up the walls, through the boards, through their sleeping bodies. It stayed to live with all of us. Borisa didn't flee because she had reached whatever goal she had. She fled because the system sent it back to her. I could say I always knew that Borisa did strange things, that there were rituals, habits, silences placed in the wrong places, but I never imagined this scale. I never imagined it wasn't an isolated gesture, but a whole uterus functioning for years. My grandmother, Maria, was the first to receive it all. Whether she died from that or from an illness that comes with age, I don't know. Maybe there's no real difference between the two. The body also gets tired of holding what it never asked for. That day, we abandoned the house. Not the way you abandon a place, but the way you abandon an organism that is no longer compatible with life. We didn't clean. We didn't gather anything. We didn't choose what to keep. We never touched those floors or those walls again. We knew any attempt at order would be a lie. We talked about selling it and fell silent. Who would live there afterward? What would happen when the space closed itself again around our bodies? There was no longer a woman birthing her filth, but the cracks remember. The materials remember. We didn't know how much had remained or how far it had seeped. We also didn't want it to become an abandoned house that could be inhabited by some mortal clown. One of those houses time eats slowly, because time always works for these things. So we did nothing. The house stayed there. Not alive, not dead. An empty uterus no one dares to fill again.
Most heartfelt greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlethems. I eagerly welcome you to Sturgeon's most premier station, Dusklight Radio, hosted by yours truly, the cantankerous yet cautious, anatomically anomalous, and delightfully delirious Everett J. Blackwell. Perhaps you know of us Blackwells. We provided the first ever tour of the underworld, or at least one of the underworlds. We didn't secure planning permission to build a static entrance for any of the others. No, sir. At the owners' round table, quite a few of the gatekeepers were unhappy with our conduct. My father, Theodore Blackwell, was called a snake that eats his own tail, and that oil runs through his veins, not venom, by one gatekeeper who promptly pulled a tooth out and hurled it at him. My father, ever the diplomat, pointed out that if the fine gentleman ever wanted to find out what was in his blood, they could just go and take a bite of him any time. He was a cantankerous sort. Now that blood runs through mine and Evelyn's veins, forever destined to taint the land should it ever be spilled on fertile soil. Dusklight's been going through some changes this year, such is the way as both our staffing and our family quarters do expand. Some may come and go, but their memories, traits, and quirks stay forever. And it's time to check in with our Blackwell residents. Janitor Supremo TJ Lee has been down in the basement, mostly covering SCP articles and trying to atone for the magenta horror incident of 2024. We think he'll get there eventually. He came up to the break room between shows and was immediately assailed by a horde of rabbits trying to trample him, crawl into his clothes, and bite his eyes. When he managed to assuage himself of the thrall of furry devils, we saw TJ Blackwell cackling down the hallway at his misfortune, leaving behind unread receipts from tax info that he hadn't filed on time. He's been consistently trying to take over TJ's life through the power of the name alone, feeling that if he owns the name, well, he owns the janitor's life. He's attempted numerous schemes over the past month, none coming to fruition, but he's as of yet undeterred, and, well, Noldus loves a trier. Somehow, he's also finding time to fight a war against anything decaf, including water, just to wipe it off the planet. Kind of spiteful if you ask me, but he wanted time to highlight the evils of decaf, so who am I to judge? Deliria Blackwell brought in some traditional German food for us to eat, being from the Germanic chapter of our family, Rouladon being a firm favorite. Now that's multiple long, thin strips of meat covered with mustard and filled with bacon, onion, and pickles. I think they're trying to ply me with good food because they've been experimenting with new diseases both to cure and to, enact on their packed enemies, including that of the pointing disease, a scourge that once befell old Sturgeon. Should you be pointed at, the curse would pass from fingertip to sole recipient. Clue Blackwell was the initial test subject. perfect really during their molting process. But then we discovered that their chrysalis has opened and what's inside cannot be found. All that remains now is the outline, still pointing. Dalera just offered me Greine Klies und Schwammenbrie, also known as Klosse und Pilzsoße, which is, in essence, potato dumplings and mushrooms. Well, they wanted to pass on some German knowledge to you all. You learn something new every day. Tabitha Blackwell then just took most of my plate, saying that according to Dalera, it's the Miners' Parades Day in Germany, and since she controls the mines and the rich, esoteric ore lurking within them, she was entitled to this offering from our pestilent family member. Can't argue with that, though Dalera kept tapping the calendar incessantly and shaking their head. Tabitha's been working hard on carving out a fresh annex for the station, somewhere for our more ethereal members to gestate and get comfortable, a necessity when you have a family as old and, unique as ours. I offered to bring her more staff, but she told me to mind my own business. Mining is hers, before giving me the evil eye and shaking her obsidian pickaxe in my face. Okay, Tabitha, I hear you, girl. Izzy Blackwell has taken up residence in Tunnel C, acquiring as much sugary content from the communal fridge as possible before sliding through the newly waxed floors, leading the bug army back into the walls, which appear to be a series of complex shapes and holes that lead further into the earth, strange chittering and clicking sounds coming from there deep at night. We've also had some reports that Izzy has been luring unsuspecting interns into termite-like holes in the walls they've made, returning back, but now with a strong desire to climb to the highest point possible. Well, we were concerned, so naturally we gave them a hangout on the roof. We also decided some entertainment was necessary for station morale, and we asked Adela Blackwell to be our linchpin for the main act. Adela would come in weaving firemancy to tell a series of tales about the old Blackwells, their valiant struggles against the things in the light, and how we came to prosper. There was a lot of innuendo, as is to be expected with Adela, but it was passionate, fiery, and very much a waffling. We were truly entertained. Great-granduncle Van Blackwell then came on stage with his bird show. His crow Kiwi sang a nocturne that brought tears to my eye and uncontrollable weeping to our less informed interns. Some even began to lose their corporeal forms, crying until becoming nothing more than conglomerations of tears, some of which looked, saltier than others, sugarier, maybe. Izzy Blackwell would then start scooping it up with his strange cabal of insects and say, "You can have the rest." Ethan Blackwell took his time to pitch a new antimatter fishing venture, said he'd acquired these skills and knowledge from his time in prison. When we asked him what prison he even went to, he proceeded to cast his line into one of our now tear-like interns, fish out a fresh haddock, bite it raw and say with scales in his teeth, "No prison can hold me, 'cause I'm a Blackwell, baby," before leaping into the vents. Jackal Blackwell then took stage and announced he got into business with the Farmers Collective as their new spokesman, assuring us nothing at all untoward was happening at Factory 9. Nothing at all. Why did we ask? Stop asking. Why do we always do this? You always do that. We told you it wasn't cool, but then you carried on. Eat your edible cutlery and stop being so uppity and persnickety about everything. God. But don't eat the food. Definitely don't eat the food. Then lastly, Papa Kyle Blackwell declared he's joined up with the Gravediggers on a small-scale basis to acquire a near-endless supply of spine-adjacent weaponry through their large skeleton army. He says that this is necessary for a truly diverse array of bone equipment, density, shade, structure, and sharpness. I'm not going to question him, nor Arya, as she uses the marrow for an enrichment stew set to prolong Kyle's time on the throne by a century per sip. And naturally, I want to get some of that brew for myself here at the station. These Blackwell reunions are always eventful, violent, and a little bit, mysterious. If you want to be part of the Blackwell family, you know where to find us on Patreon. Anyway, I'm Dusklight's main and most fabulous half-dead host. My job at this fine radio station is to bring you some of the most twisted, interesting, and downright bizarre tales that I and my wonderful many-legged runners collect from the far corners of Sturgeon and beyond. Some will make you laugh, some will make you cry, and some of you will be confused as to why the intro to Dusklight Radio is at the end of the video. Now, we are going to be revamping the way that we do these introductory and outro skits, but in truth, we found that unfortunately most people not truly dedicated to the Everett Blackwell introductions tend to just skip them, which breaks my little ghoulish heart, it really does. But we're gonna find a way forward, folks. For now, this is the best of both worlds. Special thanks must be given first to Mandy Mo for the original beauteous image you see of me when you look at our page, to Sir Gorky for the new rendering of yours truly, and the truly accurately horrifying rendition of our humble studio, to Viidith for the superb thumbnails you see, to Invato Elements for the SFX, Dark Somnium for being such a gracious yet terrifying sponsor of the channel, and lastly, our music is sourced and provided by Epidemic Sound with gracious thanks. If you enjoy these intros and outros and want to see more, please ensure you've got notifications on and leave a comment for every video you encounter. I want to thank all of our patrons for making this possible. If you want to sign up, it's as little as $1 a month and you get exclusive content, early access to videos and stories, updates, and more. But times are tough and we will always be grateful for support no matter what form it comes in. Financial, spiritual, corporeal, maniacal, whatever you want. It really helps us out. Dusklight gives thanks to our Sturgeonite faithfuls Maddie, Courtney, M, Ange, Someone Somewhere, Goth Mommy 666, Buggerslaw Smalek, Dave L, Morgan Ra, JT Thomas, Super Abyss, Heather G, Amy Walrath, Vow Was Taken, J.I. Lara, Nathan Billings, Jack the Lad, 21 Keys, PRDL 12, and Larry W. Our Purple Crayon Eaters, Justy Blue, Paul J. DeSena, Darkness Within, Christian Hatting, Calculi Zero, Mothman, Orphan Nuka, Okami-san, Ian Hancocks, Echo Kane, Gail Allstott, Alex, Mike, Candyman Gloving, Ashabel, Amara, Phi, Max, and Feeny Von Karma. Our janitors, Alec Hansen, Allie, DJ Muffin, Shane Lewis, Dux, Joy Flint Healy, Sabiel Eclipse, Death 31, Scott, Heather Cayley, Adrian R, Amy, Sabrina Alexander, Arkham Cookie, and Alex Nunez. Our Nightmare Detectives, Melanie and Fox Clifford. Our Void Walkers, Josh Woods, Rat Squatch, and Professor Creepypasta. And lastly, of course, our Blackwell family members. TJ Blackwell, the name stealer and hater of decaf, Izzy Blackwell, Bug Army enthusiast, Adela Blackwell, Firemancer and weaver of waffling tales, Ethan Blackwell, no prison can hold him, Great Uncle Van Blackwell and his bird show, Delayra Blackwell, Plague Doctor and Pestilence Purveyor, Clue Blackwell, the shambling horror now free from the chrysalis, Tabitha Blackwell, head of the mines and all mining resources, Jackal Blackwell, new associate of the Farmers Collective, don't worry about it, another Ethan Blackwell who just rolled into the station, and of course, Papa Kyle Blackwell with his spines and spine accessories. We love and fear you, Papa. We thank you all humbly for your patronage and look to see you bright and early for Dusklight orientation, purple crayons, and existential dread will be provided. And one last time, listeners, close your eyes and breathe with me. Remember, no matter how bad things are, how cruel people can be, and how heavy your shoulders may feel with the weight of the world bearing down on them, Dusklight will always be here to lift the load and provide you with some respite. Drink some pink lemonade Snapple, watch a video on lost civilizations, and sleep on the cool side of the pillow with the window open and the stars twinkling down on you. Start and end each day with kindness in your heart. You matter, you are loved, and every day is another chance. I'll see you again when the sun sets and dusk enters the station.